And now we're actually going to get started. Hi everybody, I'm Angela Fehr. We're going to paint together today, and I'm excited about this lesson because we've been waiting for it for a couple of weeks. And so we're going to get right to painting in a minute, but first I just want to give a little bit of an introduction to what we're going to be doing today in case you're new with us. And what we're going to be working on today is adding detail to a first layer watercolor. And often it's a lot of fun to do that first layer. 2 weeks ago we did a wet and wet wash, thinking florals, and I love painting florals because when I'm doing a loose floral arrangement, it really what makes the painting work is composition and having a good design and composition, arranging your elements so that they work together. And this can be just learning watercolor techniques and you haven't really started to feel comfortable with the different techniques. A lot of your brain is going to be very busy just focused on building skill in technique. And so as you build skill, then you start to make some real estate in your mind so that you can think about composition, self-expression, and how to take these techniques now and make them work artistically. So it's you have to give yourself time to learn technique before you can start thinking about composition. I mean, we all try to work it together a little bit, whenever you're painting, but trust the process. And if you're finding that you're just so focused on technique that you can't think about composition, just trust the process. You'll get there. You'll build the skill. You'll get the experience needed. You'll log those brush miles. And then you'll start to be able to think more about how to interpret your painting. It's really about kind of being available. I took a running workshop this last weekend. That's my exercise of choice, as I love to run, and I don't like getting injured. And I've been worried about I turned 40 this year, and I don't want to quit doing something I love because I'm getting hurt or I'm straining body parts that I need for running. So I took a workshop focused on, it was called Chi running, and it was focused on using your body more efficiently, minimizing impact and all the things that can cause you to be injured. And it's this idea of flow. And one of the things the instructor said, I thought, I have to tell my watercolor students because it so much applies to watercolor too. She said, when you're tense and trying to remember everything and do everything right, there's nothing natural about that. You have to give time for the process to work. We need to create conditions where the process can happen and where that skill can be developed. And so whenever you're painting, we focus on paying attention to what you're doing, to what's happening on the paper, to the way the water and paint react. As you learn technique, if you're really paying attention, you'll start to understand what's going to happen next. And as you feel comfortable with the techniques, and as you make time to paint, the mastery is going to happen. You're creating conditions to become a better painter. If I never pick up a paintbrush, I'm not creating the conditions to grow my skills as an artist. If I make time to paint, if I try different techniques and experiment, if I study different artists and different styles, these are all things that are going to help me become a better painter and help me hopefully learn a little more quickly. So that's something I wanted to share with you today. I talk a little bit more about it on my blog, on my website at angelafehr.com. We're going to move over to the painting, to my painting surface over here, and I have some comments on a product review I posted on YouTube today. If you have time after the broadcast, take a look. I'm trying out Viviva color sheets, and they're just this little booklet made to help watercolor be more portable. These actually contain saturated pigment in a little swatch form, and this is the one I tried out on the video, so it's a little bit used. But there's lots of pigment there that you can take with you, pop it in your purse and take it wherever you go. Brand new product launched today, and all the info's on the video. You can check that out on my YouTube channel after this video, and the information's in the description down below the video. Moving over to my work surface, and while we do that, I'm just going to switch the screen. There we go. And what you see there is just a sunny arrangement of flowers. The deal is with painting flowers is if we paint, it's kind of a jungle mess, that arrangement that you're looking at there. And because it's kind of so untidy, it would be really hard to paint that just the way we see it. You know, there's a lot of elements there. And so when we start painting something like that, we have confusing for the viewer. And so that there's kind of a flow and a unity about it. So you have to start making compositional decisions. And okay, here we go. So we want to talk about that. And yet last week we talked about basic shapes and looking at these different flowers we looked at and how they really all are just a few basic shapes. We're looking at triangles and circles and oblong like ovals and things. And when we build out from those and simplify our objects down to those basic shapes, it makes it easier to build a composition. And then 2 weeks ago we did these nice washes. I had this one done in advance for you to look at, and last week we just pulled out one detail right in the center there, and then this was the one we did on the video. And a first wash has so much promise. We can see little hints of flowers and shapes all over the paper, and hopefully if you're not seeing little hints of flowers and shapes, because sometimes it can be hard to pull those out at first, I try to keep a first wash loose enough, soft and light enough so that it's a little bit ambiguous, so you can kind of force some things to happen. Over here, for example, it's so soft that I could start imagining almost any kind of shape. It could be a big flower over on this side, it could be a cluster of tiny little blossoms, or I could just leave it the way it is and have it kind of be a background thing. And so having that kind of looseness, those options, help me to make a good composition as I start to build some details. So last week we took this one and we found one flower shape, and the temptation is here, I think, is to start looking for additional flower shapes all over the paper. And often what I see is an artist will have something like this. They've got their first wash, and then they found a flower shape over here, they found one over here, they found one over here and over here, and they've started finding all these random flower shapes. But this is very disorganized. And we're not going to talk about how it might be in life, because of course if you're looking at a flower arrangement, you know, there are flowers all over the place and it is a little disorganized. But for painting's purpose, we need to have a little bit of structure. So it works a lot better. I'm going to pull this blank sheet over. So if we're thinking instead of maybe seeing that one shape, and we're going to use our daffodil here as our first shape. And I've painted one shape here. I've found that one daffodil. And so if I start looking for daffodils all over the paper, I'm going to end up with this kind of random arrangement. And I want my painting to have some structure. I need it to have some form. So before I start finding additional flowers, it might be a good idea to think about one major composition. So maybe what I should be thinking about instead is taking, and I'm just going to look at my wash again, the bulk of the color, there's this path of yellow kind of right through here. So I might take a look at that and think, what if my arrangement, my composition, and my paper's not square the way my painting is? What if the bulk of my composition was inside of this area here? And so I have this movement going through my painting. And so if I'm thinking in those terms, then these areas are going to need to be fairly loose so they don't distract from my main composition. Being that I'm painting flowers, that means probably this area is going to be foliage and maybe a few stems or vines or whatever. And then I want the eye to move to this area. So inside of this major shape, I'm going to need to move the eye through the painting. And so that might involve looking for connections. So I might see a flower over here and maybe one over here. And that gives me a rough triangle, a little bit low on the page. So then I have a new problem, and that's how do I make this part interesting? And so I might need to look for a different type of flower. These lines here to me, I think you can see that, suggest maybe a tall blossom of something. So maybe I'll have some taller flowers coming out through here. And maybe one just kind of over here. And so suddenly now I have drawing diagrams. So now I have three objects that kind of connect to each other, which maybe just guide your eye in a circular area here. And sometimes, like, I think if I planned it better, I would have moved this flower up into here a little bit. Maybe over here would be just a little bit better. And the deal is, when you're working on that first wash, we're probably always going to make a mistake somewhere. And so knowing that, you don't just throw your painting out because you made one mistake and maybe something's positioned not quite where it should be. You compensate and you work around it. And so what I'm trying to show you here, and I know you want me to start painting, but what I want you to see is kind of a little bit of my mental, my process. What I'm seeing in my mind is not so much what flower is suggested in this wash, but how do I make my composition work. And I think it's really going to work well to have my daffodil here, another one here. I'm just going to move it a little bit, and then move the eye through the painting. Something here. And it doesn't have to be daffodil, daffodil, daffodil. It could be, you know, an interesting dramatic flower here. Something also interesting over here. Something interesting here. They don't have to be identical. And then supporting cast members, basically. Different elements that guide the eye through the painting. It could be a branch, some foliage that's over here. There could be some foliage, some leaves and greenery over on this side, and then we have some pink flowers here that we're going to try to see if we can make that all happen. In this part, we have some, I haven't talked about it all, we have some empty space that we're also going to need to fill. And the idea here is we're creating focal points and visual pathways, trying to move the eye through the painting. We want the viewer to look to the focal point and be able to progress through the rest of the painting without feeling like they're on a pinball machine looking at multiple objects that really don't seem connected to each other. So I'm trying to explain my thought process a little bit, so now we can work with what we have here. And because we started this one and we've talked about how I might compose it, we're going to work on it right now and start trying to see some of those shapes. And I do need to warn you, this is a long process. Just moistening my paint so I can start using it. Always flows a little better if it's nice and moist on the top. This is a long process. This is not something I would expect to complete in one day or in one live video lesson. I'm trying to give you an overview. There's a limit to how efficiently I can share information in a live video lesson. And if you are really interested in this process and this technique and want to know more and progress maybe at a little bit more of your own pace, I would encourage you to check out my Color Drenched Florals course, which is on my learn.angelafehr.com site. I go a lot more in depth and a little bit more slowly through the whole process in that course. Okay, so we're going to pull out some yellow because I do want to see some additional flower shapes here. And somebody asked last week, why would you paint around a yellow daffodil with yellow? And you don't have to. Yellow is kind of optional. But I did that because, for one thing, the background is basically yellow there. And yellow gives me some freedom. If I decide to go a little bit darker, I can easily paint darker over this yellow edge. However, if I were to start there with a green and pull that shape out and then decide, oh, I don't want that to look like leaves, then I'm kind of stuck. How do I get that lighter? So it's always better to be safe than sorry. Take your time, and I'm using a similar color just because it gives me a little bit more freedom to make changes if I should choose to. So We see a bit of a shape down here, which I think could easily be another flower. And this time I'm going to just paint the center of a daffodil. And that's just a round shape. And oh, I like that dot of pure color there. And we could have a long conversation about how much detail to add, and that's kind of up to the artist. What I like is to leave some elements suggested because it engages the viewer. Often the person who's looking at your painting might look a little bit longer if there's just a hint of something that they have to kind of fill in the blanks. And it can be really, it can give your viewer the feeling that you kind of trusted them well enough to not spell everything out in your painting. And it's more interesting to me as the artist as well. I'm just adding a tiny bit of kind of a blue-gray right now. And I'm not sure I'm in love with that flower shape. I like the center, and then when I started adding petals, it didn't really work in the way that I wanted it to. So then I just add a little water and soften some things out, and I will go back to it after it's had a chance to dry a bit, and I've decided a little bit more how much detail and shape I want to put into that flower. And that works a little bit better. So there's some softness there. It tells me that there's going to be a flower there without me putting in a ton of detail. And that gives me two flowers that are semi-connected. Over here I see another flower shape, and this time I am going to go to a background color. And I think I'm going to use that blue-gray that's already in my palette. And it's just a mix of kind of what we call palette dirt. I've saved kind of some colors. I don't clean my palette, and that way I have some beautiful neutrals pretty much always on hand. And I can find that other flower. Look at how that petal just pops right out there. And when you're painting around something, we call that negative painting. And generally what you do is you paint around that edge and then make sure you give your paint room to flow. Because sometimes I'll see people that they'll see an edge, and let me see if I can find a good place to do it. They'll see a petal over here, maybe right here. And they'll paint that line. And then they'll want to bleed that color to soften it away from the edge of the flower. So then you use that clean damp brush to pull the color away, but then they stop because it looks softened away. The problem is it's not really as soft as it could be. That color is the pigment in this moist wash is going to flow toward the edge, and as soon as it reaches the dry paper, it stops. And so if you have pigment that's moving toward that dry paper and then it stops, you're going to get a line. So it's just a good idea to flow that, to create that soft edge a little further than you think it should go. And in this case, I think I'm even going to lighten this edge on this side so that it's really soft and suggestive. Now it's almost invisible. So there's a soft flower there. And right down here again, it's hard to tell if that gray's stopped there or if it's just the contrast between wet paper and dry paper. So I'll just be safe and I'll moisten that just a little bit more. And so now you see there's a boundary where my painting, my flowers have kind of stopped. And while that's moist, I might just take a little bit of green and dot in a little bit of something that could be a leaf or a vine. Because it's wet, it's just going to be very soft and it's going to blend with what's already there, which I think is really pretty. And while I have that green, actually, I'm going to grab a little bit more and I'm going to move over to this area and give myself maybe a vine, or not a vine, stem, or some greenery coming off the flowers over here. to remind myself that there's a boundary where the flowers are going to be kind of in here and then getting narrower towards the edge. And I will be looking at the chat for your questions following the demonstration. So hold on if you have questions regarding my process. A lot of this does get answered in my online courses as well. And I think for over here, you know, I want to have some green flowing down here. I want to have the feeling of stems. Maybe your young child has brought you a handful of flowers for Mother's Day and shoved them in your hands, or they're laying on the table, and that you have this beautiful spray of flowers. That's almost the feeling I'm getting from this. And once I've kind of put some green shapes in there, I'm going to add some softness. My brush is nice and juicy. This is a Skoda Versatile number 10 rigger brush. It's my favorite brush, and you can see how it holds a lot of water. It's very soft bristles, and comes to a nice point, holds lots of paint as well. So it's a really versatile brush. Now, a tendency here is to start getting very dark, and I don't want to do that, so I'm going to pause and let that be. And you can see now, I think, what I mean about this being a long process. We're 25 minutes into the lesson, and I really haven't done a lot. Take your time and let it be kind of a meditative process. On this side of the painting, I want to keep things very pale. Over here, we kind of have a gray-green. That's very lovely. But over here, everything's so light, and it's hard to see on the video just all this beautiful subtleties. There's a little bit of spatter over here, a lot of beautiful softness, and I don't want to lose that. So when I go into this area to create some detail, I'm going to try to be very delicate with the colors that I use. And I should have brought in my palette that has my lavender, because there's a little bit of lavender spatter there that I do not have in this palette today. And that's the drawback of waiting 2 weeks to continue the lesson, is things get moved and relocated. And that's a little bit darker than it needs to be. So I'm using Cobalt Violet instead. And I just want to kind of suggest a little bit of very soft shapes over here. Maybe some very delicate blossoms on long stems. And I'm not quite matching the lavender from my 2 of Daniel Smith. And I'm blotting to lighten. Just making a little room for some fresh color. Cobalt Violet, and I'm going to grab some Cinereus Blue. It's made by Sinelia. I think that's my best bet for getting kind of a lavender without having my lavender on my palette. Oh, that looks kind of pretty. I'm not sure if you can see that. I tend to move off the camera if I'm not paying attention. So now we have kind of a cluster of blue blossoms that I think could be quite pretty. And if they're feeling too bold, again, I said this was very soft to begin with. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll just mist it with a little bit of clean water, and that'll just soften everything a little bit more, and then blotting again in a few spots. And I think I'm going to use a little bit of green to create some stems here. Oh, that's too dark. because I misted this with water, everything's going to be very soft. And a lot of times that softness can be to your advantage when you're painting on a wet and wet wash that's already dried, because that moisture will mean that this layer that I'm putting on now will just blend a little bit more. It won't look like it's pasted on. And I think I'll do more with this area once it's dried. Again, I'm looking at my painting and trying to really react to what I'm seeing happening here while still keeping my composition at the forefront of my mind. I want to have I want to have this movement through my painting where I'm focusing on the main areas, and then the smaller areas, the less important, the non-focal point flowers are going to guide you through the painting and yet always bring you back to the focal point as well. And I'm feeling like this is a big empty area. It needs something, and I think some supporting flowers would be helpful. And I think for that we're going to move to thinking about our pinks. We have some pinks up in this corner, and I think we can place them throughout our painting just a little bit more. And there is some pink in that area already. So I'm just cleaning my palette here a little bit. I've got some Rose Madder Lake, which I think is what I'm going to use. And just dropping it in here. Mixing it with a little bit of the lavender to give it a little bit more of a violet hue. Now, one thing I need to tell you in the interest of being honest is that I've painted many first washes that never turned into anything very good. We have to give ourselves room to make mistakes and to have things not turn out. When I was showing you, that random arrangement, I've fallen into that trap many times of looking for shapes without thinking about the overall composition. And so what I'm sharing about thinking about that one main shape, this big kind of triangle I drew with the pink highlighter, thinking in terms of that shape and then building from there and getting just gradually smaller, that's something that, it took me some time to learn. And I still will find myself getting lost in maybe a random shape on the corner of my painting, instead of focusing on this visual pathway through my painting. And this edge that I'm painting here, it might be a little bit far away from this flower to work with that flower. I might want to tweak it a little bit. Maybe that'll be a little bit better. And it's very soft right now, and I think that's going to work quite well. When you keep things soft and light, you give yourself breathing room to add more or to leave things unspoken. And when you're in the middle of a painting, it can be really hard to know whether you should be adding extra detail in a certain area or not. We tend to lose all objectivity. And what I like to call it is painting past your plan. The idea is, and I used to tell artists, because watercolor can dry so quickly, we have to paint fast. But the problem with painting fast is if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to make a big mess. And so what you have to do instead is think slow and then paint fast. And what I mean by that is plan what you're going to do, take some time and think about it, then go in and do it. And then when you get to the point where you've implemented your plan and you've painted everything you had planned to do, stop, take a break. Because what we'll do is we'll go, oh, everything went so well and this is going really well and I feel really good about it, so I'm going to keep painting. But what we don't realize is that the reason that everything went well is because we had this plan that we were implementing. And as soon as we keep going, because everything was going so well, we run a much greater risk of kind of messing up and making mistakes that are going to be very difficult to work with. Okay, I need to take a break here, and because like I said, it's very easy to paint past your plan. I see some potential here for things I want to add I like these little violet blossoms here, and I think adding a few maybe over here and maybe one or two kind of popping through will give a beautiful dynamic and also some unity and harmony through the painting. I like adding this pink in this area because it kind of echoes what's happening up here. We're getting some rhythm or movement. The pink almost connects. It goes right down along here, and then we have it in here. So we have some unity there as well. I really like the leaves I dotted in, wet and wet. That gives this very soft suggestion of almost like a fern that I don't think I'll even need to touch. I think it's done. And this flower, I can't touch it again till it's completely dry, so that's something I need to wait on. And so as I wait for things to dry and I look at my painting, I can make decisions as to what needs to happen next and create that plan of attack. So I'm going to be continuing on this kind of middle stage throughout the week, and I'm going to try and take some progress report pictures so that you guys can see what I'm doing. And we just don't have the time in a live video lesson to go through the whole thing detail by detail. I think none of us have that kind of time, but I'm excited about where this is going and looking forward to seeing those little details as I start to pull them out and make sure they work together. I don't want to put in anything that's not going to work with the rest of my painting. And if I do, then that makes my problem solving challenge just a little bit greater. I'm going to take a moment now and look at some of your questions and comments. So bear with me as I move my camera. There we go. I'm getting lots of views on my Viviva product review and comments on that. I was given the Viviva color sheets, a prototype as to review, specifically to review, and that's why they're not available yet. You have to, if you go on Indiegogo to look at them, they're shipping out, I believe, this summer. I'm just taking a look at some comments here. Feel free, if you had questions that haven't been addressed, to pop them up right now. And I want to encourage you too, if you are, like I said, if you're struggling with this kind of loose compositional painting, I have many that did not turn out. And I think that's really, for me, I've learned that making messes and failing at paintings is the best way that I learn. When I make mistakes, you kind of learn what not to do, and you take that knowledge with you to your next painting. And gradually, I think once you've made all the mistakes about 1,000 times, it starts to get a little bit easier to avoid them and to start to see patterns and to understand your working method. I like to think that I want to get everything a painting has to teach me out of it. So that means if I mess up and make a big giant mistake, I don't stop and scrap that painting. I keep working. In fact, I usually think, oh, now I have nothing to lose, and so I can really be bold and go for it and take risks and experiment on this piece of paper because I've already ruined the painting. What have I got to lose? So I want to encourage you to think of your mistakes that way. They're teaching you something. Your painting that's about to fail is going to, it gives you a playground, a sheet of paper that now you can really push your boundaries. I've been doing painting in watercolor for 20 years, and I am always going to be a student of watercolor. There's always more to learn, and as I think our human nature is one where we're continually challenging ourselves. If you're driven to create art, you just always want to make better art, and that you never get to the point where you're like, well, I've made the best art I can make, now I guess I can stop. So think about it that way. Another thing I want to just show you is if you are I have a book recommendation, and if you're thinking in terms of painting loosely floral themes in watercolor, an artist you might want to check out is Shirley Trevena. There we go. Breaking the Rules of Watercolor. And I like this book for two reasons. For one is that a lot of people come to watercolor with a lot of rules in their head. They've heard people say never use, never do this, never do that. Always paint this way. Good watercolorists don't do it that way. And Shirley Trevena says, what rules? Let's break the rules and see what we get. And I love that idea of exploring and pushing your boundaries. I just was flipping through the book, and she really does push the envelope. I wanted to show you this one little painting right down here in this corner. And it's pretty small, so you're not going to see a ton, but actually seeing it really small gives you a look at the composition. And there's a beautiful visual pathway right through here, and it's just two and a half maybe big flowers, and then some beautiful foliage and background, and just lots of loose washy stuff going on. And I love the looseness. I like the fact that when she's painting her florals, lots of color, lots of bold attempts and experimentation, and a focus on good composition, learning to find that place of unity and flow in your painting. Okay, taking a look. I appreciate everyone's comments. You guys have been very active in the comment section, and it makes it difficult for me to see all the questions. So I apologize if I've missed your question. If you've left a really great comment and I haven't pointed it out, I appreciate your faithfulness to come and watch these live video lessons. I'm always excited about sharing what I'm learning with you, and hoping that I can explain it in a clear way so that it helps you and encourages you in your watercolor journey. Invisibles asks, Angela, to what extent do you visualize the effect of each brushstroke before you make it? One thing, I think probably some of that's internal, because as I paint, I get to, when you have experience, you kind of fall in this happy place where you can kind of anticipate what's going to happen, and yet it's always a thrill to see what's going to happen, and we just get better at reacting to what we see happening on the paper. So it's, and I'm sorry, so that's, so I think there is some visualization, some imagination that's going on there. Angel Help says, I'm a musician who recently began trying watercolor. There are so many parallels, and I really agree with that. I think sometimes art, we get this thing where if you don't have a gift, then why paint at all? And we don't say that to musicians very often. If you're learning, my daughter takes piano, and I didn't look at her when she was 7 and wanted to take piano lessons and said, well, I don't know if you have the gift, so maybe we shouldn't try. Between my two daughters and their different learning styles, I think the one that's going to become skilled at watercolor or at piano is the one who loves it more, because she's going to be motivated to practice and grow her skills. So it's about passion much more than talent. And I want to encourage you with that. If you love watercolor, find something to love about every painting you do, and you'll just keep painting, and then you just can't help but getting better. Lana asks, Angela, when are you going to publish a book? I wish I could. I am trying to write more about my thoughts on watercolor, and who knows, maybe one day when the time is right. And I really believe in, when I have that vision in my head, then I'll go there. Until then, I will recommend to you the artists who've written really great books that inspire me. Annie asks if I could show the front of the book again. Down in the down in the description below this video, I do have a link to this book on Amazon. Make it easy for you to find. Breaking the Rules of Watercolor by Shirley Trevena. Abby asks, what if you just want to use this loose technique for backgrounds? I'm a more classic watercolorist. That is something I really love about this technique, is you can take it and go as detailed as you want to get. Something you might want to do then, Abby, is start with a sketch of your composition. Try not to let it boss you around, because I don't like it when we feel like we're a slave to our drawing. But you could do a loose sketch of your floral arrangement, what you see in your head, and then put a really beautiful wash in pale colors over top of that to suggest where everything's going to go, and then just gradually build up the detail and get a really beautiful effect that way. Lots of questions, and I only have so much time to share it. if I could tell you one thing to take away, I think I would go back to have a plan and then pause. You know, take that paint to your plan and then take a break. It's really helpful to keep you from falling into those classic watercolor traps of overworking and just kind of painting aimlessly without knowing what you're doing. So, so think of it that way. Think slow and then paint fast. If you like this video and this lesson, you might find yourself falling in love with my online courses because the information there is much more efficiently given than I can do in a live lesson, and structured. Plus, you get to watch the live video or the videos over and over again. I also have in my online courses a student gallery section where you can post your artwork, and then I come in weekly and give comments and critiques to help you grow in your watercolor journey. Do take a look at the description below the video. I'm seeing more comments about books to review, so I will take a look at those. Jeannie Doby, I think I'd love to try out review one of her books one of these days. And Madison asks if I visualize my paintings or just paint as I go all the time. I like to start with an idea in my head, and then I like to be really flexible to kind of change my plan if the watercolor starts to suggest something else. I gotta shut this down because it's time for lunch here, and I appreciate your time out of your busy day to watch the video. Have a really great day. Just continue to trust the process. Let watercolor be a part of your life, and you'll see yourself improve. Look for those little learning moments, and wishing you all well. Have a great day.